Hello there, wake up. It's Means Morning News. Just after 11 a.m. on the East Coast in Washington, D.C., and this is that source for anti-capitalist news and analysis, and I'm that host, Sam Sachs. Good morning to everyone, especially all the cryptids out there. We don't recognize them enough. You know, your Bigfoots, your Loch Ness Monsters, your Chupacabras. We're fans of all the creatures on this show. Except the Mothman. Screw that guy. All my homies hate the Mothman. And we begin in Montana, where the Republican majority in the House voted on Wednesday to ban the state's first transgender lawmaker from participating in legislative debates for the remainder of the session. In an echo of how Tennessee Republicans voted to expel 2 black lawmakers for a breach of decorum rules earlier this month, Oklahoma Republicans accused State Rep. Zoe Zephyr of disrupting proceedings after she gave an impassioned speech against legislation that would prohibit gender-affirming care for young people in the state. Zephyr said that lawmakers who supported the bill would have blood on their hands. In response, a group of conservatives in the chamber who belong to the Montana Freedom Caucus accused Zephyr of using hateful rhetoric and attempting to shame the legislative body. And in the caucus letter against Zephyr, the Republican lawmakers deliberately misgendered her. Demonstrations have been ongoing at the State House on behalf of Zephyr. On Monday, protesters packed the gallery and shouted, "Let her speak," after Republicans refused to let Zephyr participate in debate. The agitation in the gallery forced a shutdown of the legislative session for 2 days, and on Wednesday, Republicans closed the gallery to spectators. The 68-32 vote banned Zephyr from the floor of the chamber. She will still be allowed to vote on legislation, but only remotely. Montana Governor Greg Gianforte is expected to sign the anti-trans bill into law, but the story might not end there. The Biden White House is finally taking an aggressive approach to protecting transgender kids from the GOP's state-level eliminationist campaign. The administration filed suit against Tennessee this week, alleging that the state's ban on gender-affirming care for trans youth is a violation of the Constitution's Equal Protection Clause. The Department of Justice is seeking a court order to block the law from going into effect on July 1st. Assistant Attorney General Kristen Clark said in a press release, quote, "The right to consider your health and medically approved treatment options with your family and doctors is a right that everyone should have, including transgender children who are especially vulnerable to serious risks of depression, anxiety, and suicide. The Civil Rights Division of the Justice Department will continue to aggressively challenge all forms of discrimination and unlawful barriers faced by the LGBTQI+ community." The department is going to be pretty busy, as more than a dozen states under the control of Republicans have now passed legislation this session targeting transgender individuals. Democrats have the majority in the United States Senate, but looking at legislation that's being passed out of the chamber, you wouldn't know it. On Wednesday, senators passed a bill to cancel a new clean energy rule aimed at cutting pollution from heavy and medium-duty shipping trucks. Finalized in December, the EPA's nitrogen oxide rule requires manufacturers of heavy trucks to create vehicles that cut emissions by 80%. More than 70 million Americans live alongside shipping routes, and the nitrogen oxide emissions have been proven to cause respiratory and cardiovascular issues. The EPA estimated that its rule will reduce asthma cases and deaths by tens of thousands every single year. Of course, the trucking industry hates the rule because it doesn't want to invest in cleaner vehicles, profits over people's lives, and all that stuff. So it lobbied Congress, and a resolution was introduced in the Senate by Republican Deb Fischer from Nebraska to overturn the rule. And on Wednesday, it passed the Senate in a 50-49 vote. It was only able to pass because, one, Senator Dianne Feinstein couldn't vote, and apparently it's still sexist to recommend she step down so that constituents in California have a functioning senator. And two, Joe Manchin remains a huge piece of shit. The Democrat from West Virginia was the deciding vote to push the bill across the finish line. Good news is the White House already said it would veto the legislation. Still, a sign of real dysfunction in the Dem Senate majority. It'd be like if a mobster walked up to Chuck Schumer with a baseball bat and said, "Hey, nice majority you got here. It'd be a shame if something happened to it." And then Schumer took the bat and proceeded to kneecap himself with it. Manchin, by the way, is growing increasingly upset with President Biden. The senator went on Fox News this week and complained that the administration is not living up to its commitments to boost domestic fossil fuel production. Manchin claimed he would vote to repeal the Inflation Reduction Act, which he was basically allowed to write last year, if the White House doesn't allow for more investments on fossil fuels. But nobody should listen to Joe Manchin's advice. He's deeply unpopular in his home state. Mitch McConnell is the only senator that has a lower approval rating among their constituents than Joe Manchin. After months of organizing, workers at YouTube Music voted to join a union this week. The Alphabet Workers Union, which is a division of the Communication Workers of America, announced the results of the union election on Wednesday. 41 votes in favor and 0 against. The workers are technically employed by a contracting company called Cognizant, which is one of several contractors that Google and its parent company Alphabet rely on to maintain operations. But the National Labor Relations Board ruled in March that Alphabet is indeed a joint employer and thus is required to bargain with any workers who unionize at those contracting companies. Alphabet has appealed that ruling. According to the union, YouTube Music workers make as little as $19 an hour and minimal benefits, and often they're required to take side gigs just to have enough money to pay their own bills. When they announced their intention to form a union last year, Cognizant retaliated against them. The company also ended remote work opportunities and tried to force employees to return to the office. That prompted a strike in February. Now, assuming Wednesday's election is certified by the NLRB, and assuming Alphabet loses its appeal on the joint employer determination, then it would mark the first time that the tech giant is required to collectively bargain with a unionized workforce. And that's pretty tight. Hey, no show tomorrow, so we're doing another special Thursday edition of Rich Dicks. Don't worry, we're back to our regularly scheduled Friday Rich Dick sessions next week. So, viewers of the show know that we don't pull any punches around here, but one thing I'm not a big fan of is kicking people when they're already down. That is, unless they're an irredeemable fascist, in which case, kick away. Which brings us to this week's Rich Dick, Steven Crowder. Racist, anti-gay, anti-union piece of shit conservative media star announced this week he's getting a divorce. And it's clear that what upsets him the most about it is that his wife is legally allowed to just leave him. In a 5-minute clip announcing the divorce, Crowder referenced Texas's no-fault divorce laws 3 times.
I have been living with a proverbial boot on my neck for going on years now. Since 2021, I've been living through what has increasingly been a horrendous divorce. Now, let me say on the outset, to be clear, there is no infidelity, any kind of physical abuse at all on either side. And no, this was not my choice. My then wife decided that she didn't want to be married anymore. And in the state of Texas, that is completely permitted. My opinions on parenting and families have not changed. I've always believed that children need a mom and a dad, that divorce is horrible. And I still believe that children need a mom and a dad and that divorce is horrible. But in today's legal system, my beliefs don't matter. In Texas, divorce is permitted when one party wants it, period. And she wanted something else for her life. That's not my choice. She simply wanted out, and the law says that that's how it works.
Damn, I haven't seen Crowder this torn up since he got punched out by a union electrical worker. Anyway, all this helps explain why Crowder has recently been railing against no-fault divorce laws on his show. But he's not the only one. It's become a pet issue for the biggest freaks on the right, including guys like U.S. Senator J.D. Vance and Beanie Boy Tim Pool. Fundamentally, these guys hate women and would prefer to return to the days when wives couldn't seek a divorce and were essentially property of their husbands. There is some cosmic justice, though, in seeing a guy who pretended to care about family values and the importance of a two-parent household like Crowder has, but only as a cudgel against gay, lesbian, transgender individuals, now dealing with the dissolution of his own marriage. Crowder has made a career out of attacking women, minorities, and the LGBTQ plus community, and it's proven to be very lucrative. I mean, Ben Shapiro's The Daily Wire tried to give Crowder a massive contract, more in line with what you see given to professional athletes. 4 years, $50 million. Crowder rejected it. He wanted over $100 million, and he eventually signed with Rumble. So yeah, Crowder's shtick as a bigoted meathead has earned him a lot of money, but also caused his family to hate him. So who's to say if it was all worth it? I'll leave that up to him and his defense lawyers. In the meantime, Steven Crowder, he's this week's Rich Dick. Hey, if you're curious to find out what happened this week in working class history, you've come to the right place. Let's open up the archives. And we begin in 1945 with the death of fascist Italian dictator Benito Mussolini. Facing total military defeat at the end of World War II, Mussolini attempted to flee into Switzerland along with a convoy of fascist allies, but they were captured by a group of communist partisans. Mussolini, alongside his mistress, were put up against a wall and shot to death with a machine gun. Later, their bodies were hung upside down from a gas station roof in a suburban square in Milan, alongside other executed fascists. The square had previously been the site of a massacre of communists ordered by Mussolini. The corpses were beaten and pelted with vegetables until Allied troops arrived in Milan and took the bodies down. Anyway, that's how you deal with a fascist. Next up, 1980, when the Sabuk uprising in South Korea happened. It involved coal miners in the city who endured brutal working conditions for low wages that didn't keep up with rising prices. When the National Miners Union pushed for a pay increase, mine owners ignored the demands and refused to even meet with the workers. And so, the workers began occupying their offices and mines. The police were called in, but the workers drove them out of the city too, stealing their weapons and taking explosives from the mines. And for a few days, the workers controlled Sabuk. That was until the government agreed to honor all 11 demands of the miners in exchange for surrendering their weapons. When the workers agreed, however, they were immediately betrayed by the South Korean military dictatorship, which had the full support of the United States, by the way. The pay increases were rescinded, and many of the workers involved in the uprising were arrested, tortured, and jailed. Moving ahead now to 1998, when a general strike rocked Denmark, private sector workers saw profits had doubled for capitalists in the country, but their own wages remained stagnant. After a series of negotiations between unions and employers resulted in a non-satisfactory contract offer that was quickly rejected by the workers, a strike was called. 500,000 workers took part in it, roughly a fifth of Denmark's entire workforce. Factories, shops, restaurants, construction, transportation, all were shut down. The workers wanted a 35-hour work week, a 6% wage increase, and an extra week of paid holiday. The strike lasted over a week before the government stepped in to pass legislation to meet some of the workers' demands, but that also declared the strike illegal. Union leaders accepted the deal and told members it was the best offer they could get. And the next day, most workers had returned to their job, although sporadic strikes continued across the country. And finally, this week in 2013, over 1,100 Bangladeshi garment workers were killed in a building collapse due to lax safety regulations. The next day, hundreds of thousands of workers took to the streets to protest the deaths of their friends and colleagues. They shut down businesses, they clashed with police, and they burned down a number of factories. In the weeks after the catastrophic building collapse, a number of global brands signed on to agreements to improve working conditions for laborers in Bangladesh. The program was created to mitigate fire, building, and electrical risks in factories. But as the New York Times reported this week, a number of American companies never signed on to those agreements, including Walmart, Levi's, Gap, and Amazon, and that these companies are still using exploitative purchasing tactics that put workers in harm's way. Those companies rely on a steady stream of cheap clothes made by low-wage labor. To learn more about these stories or any other events in working class history, follow the project on Twitter, listen to the podcasts, and subscribe on Patreon. Back with more next week. All right, gang, the show ends this morning with a sunrise from Wyoming. It was sent in by Jay aboard their tractor outside Burns. Enjoy. Thank you, Jay. Show's over. Thanks for watching, and thanks to the team behind the scenes. Please subscribe to Means TV if you haven't yet. There's a 7-day free trial going on right now. Also, subscribe to our YouTube and podcast channels while you're at it. One day, capitalism will fall. Until then, we're going to be right here. No show tomorrow. See you next week.